What if the land of Nod was never meant to be a vague, symbolic exile, but a real place, an ancient world beyond Eden, where forgotten peoples already lived before Cain ever arrived? Could it be that Cain did not wander into an empty wilderness, but instead stepped into the shadow of a civilization erased from sacred history? And if that is true, then who did Cain really meet in Nod, and why has the memory of that world been buried beneath the sands of time? Cain's story is one of the oldest and most haunting narratives in the Bible. The firstborn of Adam and Eve, his very existence carries the weight of humanity's first inheritance, the blessing of creation and the curse of rebellion. He worked the soil, tending the earth outside Eden's gates, while his brother Abel tended the flocks. When the time came to offer their gifts to God, Abel's offering was received with favor, but Cain's was not. The bitterness that grew inside him became the seed of the world's first murder. Rising against his brother in the field, Cain shed blood upon the ground, a ground already cursed by Adam's sin. And in that moment, the story of humanity took its first violent turn. But what followed is even more mysterious. When God confronted Cain, he did not strike him dead. Instead, he marked him with a sign that would protect him from being killed by others. This has puzzled generations of readers, because if Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel were the only people alive, then who were these others who might kill Cain? Where did they come from, and how could Cain fear them? The Bible tells us only that Cain was exiled east of Eden, into a place called the land of Nod, where he took a wife and built a city. That single sentence, brief and enigmatic, raises more questions than it answers. Who lived in Nod? How did Cain find a wife there? And what kind of city could one man build alone, unless there were already people to help him? To many, the land of Nod has been reduced to a symbol. In Hebrew, Nod is related to the word for wandering, as though Cain's punishment was simply to be restless, cast adrift without a home. Yet if we read the text carefully, Nod is not described as a concept but as a place, the land of Nod, east of Eden. The wording suggests geography, not metaphor. It hints at borders, directions, and regions beyond Adam's immediate world. Eden itself was described with rivers that branched and flowed into lands rich with gold and onyx. If Eden had geography, why should Nod not also have been real? Some apocryphal texts and rabbinic traditions suggest that Adam and Eve had many sons and daughters beyond Cain and Abel, who multiplied and spread across the earth. Others go further, claiming that beings existed even before Adam, pre-Adamic peoples whose origins lie in a more ancient creation, either as angelic hybrids, lost races, or forgotten nations. To these traditions, Cain did not wander into emptiness but into a world already populated by others, a world outside the line of Adam's covenant. Could it be that Nod was their homeland, a place of ancient knowledge and rebellion, where Cain's curse found company rather than solitude? When Cain arrived in Nod, the text tells us he knew his wife and had a son named Enoch. Immediately afterward, it says he built a city and named it after his son. This is perhaps one of the strangest claims in all of Genesis. A city requires more than a man, his wife, and one child. A city demands laborers, builders, craftsmen, families, and generations. For Cain to establish one so quickly suggests that he entered into a society already standing, or at least one with enough people to join him. This is the great silence in the text, the unspoken truth that others must have been there. But who were they, and why is their existence cloaked in silence? Some scholars argue that these others were simply Adam and Eve's descendants, born in the centuries that followed. After all, the early patriarchs lived for hundreds of years, giving ample time for vast families to spread across the land. By this view, Cain simply married one of his sisters or nieces, and the city he built was populated by his extended kin. Yet this explanation leaves much unsaid. If Cain feared vengeance from his own family, then why was he exiled away from them? Why name a new land at all, unless Nod was already distinct from Adam's settlement? Other interpretations, particularly from apocryphal and mystical traditions, present a more unsettling possibility. They suggest that Nod was the dwelling place of beings not descended from Adam. Some Jewish mystical writings connect Nod to the domain of fallen angels, the watchers who descended and mingled with humanity. In this telling, Cain's exile was not only a punishment but also a crossing into a realm of forbidden knowledge, where he encountered others outside God's chosen order. His mark, then, may not have been merely protection but a sign that allowed him to survive among them. Could Cain's wife have been one of these? Was his city the beginning of a hybrid civilization, one that would grow into the corrupted world destroyed by the flood? Even language itself may preserve fragments of the mystery. The word Nod has echoes not only of wandering but also of exile, estrangement, and the twilight between wakefulness and sleep. To dwell in Nod is to dwell in the margins, beyond consciousness, outside the light of God's presence. Some have even suggested that our modern use of Nod carries a shadow of this ancient exile, as though Cain's punishment became a metaphor for drifting away from awareness into forgetfulness. If so, then Nod is not merely a land but a condition, a threshold between worlds, where those cast out from Eden's light wander among shadows. The Apocryphal Book of Jubilees and other early writings give tantalizing glimpses into this lost world. They describe how the children of Adam spread into different regions, how angels once walked among them, and how hidden knowledge was given to humanity by beings not of this earth. If Cain, cursed and marked, walked into such a realm, then his city may have been more than a settlement. It may have been a stronghold of rebellion, a rival to the order of Eden, a place where the legacy of violence and pride first took root. The very act of naming his city after his son reflects this, an echo of the later kings who built empires in their own names, exalting themselves rather than God. Archaeological echoes may even whisper of this forgotten Nod. Across Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East, there are legends of primeval cities whose origins are shrouded in mystery. Some speak of Eridu, the first city, said to have been founded by gods before men. Others tell of hidden civilizations in the East, whose knowledge predates the flood. Could these traditions be distant memories of Cain's city, or of the world he entered when he fled eastward? If so, then Nod may not have vanished entirely, but instead left its imprint on the mythologies of nations. The deeper one looks, the more the boundaries blur between history, myth, and theology. Cain's exile is not just about punishment, it is about the hidden intersections of human and non-human, divine and fallen, remembered and forgotten. His journey eastward mirrors the journey of humanity itself, moving further from the presence of God into lands of uncertainty. The land of Nod becomes a symbol of humanity's restless heart, always wandering, always building cities, always searching for meaning beyond Eden's gates. But the haunting question remains, who did Cain really meet in Nod? Was it his own kin, scattered and multiplied? Was it pre-Adamic peoples, survivors of an earlier creation? Or was it the Watchers and their offspring, whose forbidden union would later fill the earth with corruption? The silence of Genesis invites us to wonder, as though the truth lies just beyond the veil, too dangerous or too mysterious to be spoken outright. We stand at the threshold of that forgotten world. Cain has shed his brother's blood, borne the mark of God, and walked eastward into exile. Before him stretches the land of Nod, a place unnamed until his arrival, yet perhaps older than the garden itself. What he found there, and what legacy he began, is the mystery we must now confront. For in that land, beyond Eden's light, Cain's story merges with the shadow of civilizations erased, leaving us to ask, was the land of Nod the birthplace of the first city, or the echo of a world humanity was never meant to remember? When Cain left the presence of the Lord, the text tells us he journeyed eastward, into a land called Nod. But the silence of Scripture about what Nod actually was has ignited endless speculation. Was it a barren exile, a symbolic wandering, or a populated region filled with beings who predated Adam's line? The question presses against the borders of theology, archaeology, and myth. For if Cain built a city there, as Genesis claims, who are its inhabitants? Cities are not built for one man alone. A city requires families, workers, relationships, generations. So already the story hints at something larger, an unseen population outside Eden's narrative. Some traditions hold that Nod was not a wilderness but the dwelling of ancient peoples, perhaps those born of Adam and Eve's other children who had already spread into distant lands. Yet apocryphal voices suggest a deeper mystery, that Cain entered a world already occupied by forgotten beings, remnants of a creation before Adam. This is where archaeology and myth converge. In Mesopotamian tablets, in Sumerian king lists, and in strange accounts preserved by the ancients, we find echoes of civilizations before the flood, cultures ruled by figures described as mighty men and semi-divine rulers. Could Nod have been one of their domains? Cain's fear makes sense in this light. He tells God that others will seek his life if he wanders. But who are these others? The text never says they were his siblings. Some argue they were, but the narrative seems to point further outward, into a wider world. The mark of Cain becomes less a family protection and more a divine shield in a dangerous and already populated earth. If this is true, then Nod may not have been an empty exile but an integration into another lineage, perhaps even into the societies hinted at in ancient myths of hybrid kings, watchers, and beings of shadow. Archaeologists studying pre-flood traditions note that cultures worldwide tell of primeval rulers and advanced knowledge existing long before the familiar civilizations of history. From the Sumerian Apkallu to the antediluvian kings of Babylon, from the Apkallu statues guarding temples to the giant bones whispered about by ancient chroniclers, the sense is clear: the earliest ages were crowded with beings both human and something more. When Cain entered Nod, was he stepping into their realm, carrying with him the bloodline of Adam into a world already in motion? The very name Nod means wandering, exile, or unrest. Yet Cain settled there and built. The paradox suggests that he transformed his punishment into permanence. He gave shape to a city in a land defined by dislocation. This mirrors countless ancient myths of first kings who, cast out or chosen by fate, established foundations for civilization. In this way, Cain becomes more than a murderer. He becomes the archetype of the fallen ruler, one who carries both curse and crown. But beneath this lies the unsettling possibility that his city was not the first, only the first in Adam's line. If Nod already had inhabitants, if it was already alive with people or beings unmentioned by Genesis, then Cain's story is not just of exile but of contact between Adam's cursed son and those who came before. And in that moment, history as we know it may have merged with a forgotten world. Cain's life in Nod becomes more than an exile, it is a mirror reflecting the tension between divine judgment and human destiny. Scripture gives us only fragments, yet the fragments are loaded with implications. Cain knew his wife in Nod, and they bore a son named Enoch. The building of a city and the naming of a child form the first recorded human legacy outside Eden. But who was Cain's wife? If she was a sister from Adam's line, the text leaves it unspoken. If she was of another people already in Nod, then the story opens into something far larger, the blending of Adam's bloodline with those who predated him. This possibility unsettles the neat boundaries many imagined for early Genesis. It suggests that Adam and Eve were not the only beings on earth but the chosen pair through whom God's narrative of covenant would unfold. Others may have existed alongside them, hidden in the background until Cain's crime forced him eastward. Suddenly, the forgotten world is no longer hypothetical, it becomes the context in which the first city was raised. In apocryphal writings and rabbinic traditions, whispers of Cain's union with strange beings persist. Some accounts imply that the sons of God later described in Genesis 6 had already begun to mingle with human women, producing offspring of unusual stature and knowledge. Could Nod have been a precursor to that union? A testing ground where exile met the mysterious? If so, Cain's city was not merely the first attempt at civilization but the seed of something darker, a fusion of divine rebellion, human guilt, and primeval survival. Even language itself testifies to the mystery. The English phrase to nod off, meaning to drift into unconsciousness, echoes Cain's fate. He wandered, he lost the presence of God, he entered into a sleep from which true communion was cut off. To live in Nod was to live in a shadow of reality, in exile from the center of divine purpose. Yet even there, life continued. Children were born. Culture emerged. Instruments, livestock, crafts, all are attributed to Cain's descendants. Civilization itself sprouted in the soil of judgment. But the question remains, who are the unseen neighbors? If Cain feared them, if he mingled with them, then human history as we know it began not in isolation but in encounter. The ancient myths of watchers, titans, and forgotten kings may not be distant echoes but distorted memories of this moment. Cain's exile becomes humanity's expansion, an intersection where Adam's blood met the world beyond Eden. And perhaps this is the true secret of Nod. It was never just a barren land, but the threshold between the known and the hidden, between divine history and human memory. In that forgotten world, Cain carried both the curse of blood and the seed of culture. His story does not end in banishment but in the mysterious foundation of the very civilizations that would one day rise, fall, and leave behind the ruins we now uncover.